I mean, this thing is the biggest mess in history. How is China ever going to grow strongly again? And my answer is never.
In today's video, Harry Dent, author of 0 Hour, talks about what's up with bonds, the next moves of the Fed, the raging inflation and the coming recession. Dent has been predicting a great reset of the biggest financial asset bubble in history. The market historian predicted a painful crash in stocks and an economic depression, and discusses the next moves before the big crash. He believes that the top is in and the Fed is tightening aggressively. Could the markets make a new high?
No economy in the world has ever had that, and no economy could survive that without top-down central planning and government support of the economy. Basically, the Chinese government has told developers, just build and we'll cover your ass.
Yeah.
And that's what they've done. Now, there's a point where you can't do that when there's just so much empty, and then growth is finally slowing with China. People think, oh, China, India, all these Asian countries, they're going to grow forever. India, yes. China, no. China, demographically, like I measure for every country in the world, developed and emerging, China literally peaked in 2011. They've already seen the highest demographic surge in spending naturally they would ever see. It's all stimulus other than that. And they go down forever. So Japan is simply a leading indicator. And I've been saying this for decades. Japan was the first major developed country to peak because of demographics peaking. I mean, in forever. Their demographics never get back to where they were. They peaked in 1996. Their bubble peaked in 89 for stocks and 91 for real estate, just like our first tech bubble peaked in 2000, ahead of the 2007 demographic peak, and real estate peaked just after that. So they're in a long-term decline. China is the only emerging country, and the largest one until India gets bigger and stronger, the largest one in the world, and they are done. They're the only emerging country that has falling demographic growth for as far as the eye can see for decades in the future. So they don't recover from this, and they have 22% empty homes. So after getting from 20% to 60% urban, and that's the biggest thing emerging countries do. Demographics is second to urbanization, because every urban person has 3 times the spending power as a rural in these emerging countries. Okay, so moving people to cities is more powerful than even them going from their 20s to their 40s and naturally higher spending. So that's what China's done, but China overdid it. China's government, the only way, since they're not elected, they keep their people happy and not worrying about a top-down authoritarian government, which doesn't survive in most wealthy countries anymore, is to keep the economy growing. So that's what they did. And they did it by creating 22% empty houses, and that is death. If we had 22% empty homes in the United States, we would have a deflationary spiral that would last for a decade or two. And any other country would. And that's what I think is going to happen to China. China's going to fall hard when they fall, and there's no coming out of it. Even when China crashes and real estate bottoms maybe 50, 60% lower and stocks 70, 80% lower, I still wouldn't be a big buyer there, because they have nowhere to grow. Because the rest of they're 60% urban, and to get to more normal 80% maturity, they've already built all those homes already. They're already empty waiting. They don't have to build another home ever. How is China ever going to grow strongly again? And my answer is never. They're done, just like Japan. Japan will never see new highs in the stock market. I said that back then after the 1989 highs and 91 real. And China will never see new highs in real estate or stocks again. And everybody thinks China is going to become the #1 country in the world. They're going to be #2 for a long time, but they are not going to overtake the United States.
Are they super livable? Well, are they livable 10 years down the road? Should they somehow find a way to reach 80%?
Are they in the right places since they build? What if people really start moving to some other places, and they have these empty condos in the places the government, instead of the markets, chose to build them just to stimulate? I mean, this thing is the biggest mess in history. And tell you, Jay, what I love about it, it's going to prove finally, without a shadow of doubt, that free market capitalism, despite its extremes and problems, is way better than central planning of economies. Sure. China is the last one to fall for that, and its people to fall for that. And the government had, as I said earlier, had to overdo it just to get people to shut up about it, not worry about it. When this thing falls, imagine people are going to be they're going to be so pissed at their government, they're not going to be able to see straight. These people, unlike the US, where 35% of our net worth approximately is in real estate, you know what is in China? 75%.
For real.
And they're going to fall 50 to 60% when we fall 30 to 40 here or so. And it's going to be devastating. And a lot of Chinese people, everyday people, not rich people, have a second or third home and it's not even rented out. It's empty. Yeah. They're not renters and they don't rent out real estate. So they're buying second and third homes for speculation.
Yeah.
This is I would not want to be in China in the next 10 years. It's going to be a disaster.
Do you have any idea what percent of net worth in the US is tied up in the stock market?
In the US?
Yeah.
Not as much because wealthy people buy stocks a lot more, although everyday people have moved in. That's one of the problems that you can see that the dumb money has been more buying into stocks in the late 80s. They did that into 2000. They did that again here in the last year or so. So more people are getting in that. But I can tell you one thing, there's no question about it. If you look at history, a real estate crash is much more damaging to the everyday person than a stock crash. Yeah. Because everybody that can possibly get a loan owns real estate. And most people don't. The wealthier people have more of their money in private equity and stocks and things like that rather than real estate. So the everyday person is much more exposed in their net worth to real estate. Yeah. That's for sure.
You know, you look at demographics at quite a deep level. Where are you seeing an upside? Because it's kind of like the world right now, it seems enveloped in this demographic crisis. Yeah. Some countries are leading the way. Japan's got it super rough. China's not far behind. US is maybe, 20, 40 years behind them though, moving the same direction. What about India, Harry? Are you optimistic?
Yeah. I mean, there's two things about demographics. There is the spending wave, which I can take in any country in the world, emerging or developed. Okay. But the second difference is there are countries that in the emerging world, as they urbanize, certain countries' economies are more powerful. They just are. There's more gains in GDP per capita for every 1% urban gain than there is in other countries, okay? And I've said something astounding for a while, and Indian economists would disagree with me on that India will ultimately be as rich or richer than China. They're simply far less urban, okay? If you look at where they are on the urbanization curve, they are richer at their 28% urban than China was at the same point, which means they could be as rich or richer than China. And I have Chinese economists, Indian economists say there's no way India will ever be as rich as China. I'm like, no, I think, first of all, the demographics stay high. They're going to peak about 1.7 billion population in India. China has already peaked at 1.4 billion and will actually in the next 50 years projected to shrink to less than 800 million. They're going to lose 30-40% of their population. So China is going to be the most dramatic story of instant success, overstimulation in a large country with huge urbanization potential, which overdid it. And then the fall of China is going to be the most dramatic in history. India is going to become the next China. India is starting about where China was when they started to urbanize rapidly. India can learn from China's mistakes and see the cost of overbuilding and overdoing it, so they won't have to do that, and they'll have good reasons not to do that, even though people urge them to do it. So India really is the next big thing. India, Pakistan, and Southeast Asia. So what's really happening, Europe and America are plateauing long-term. I'd say the US is basically plateauing as a major power and economy between the 2007 baby boom peak and the 2037 millennial peak in spending, okay? So we've come down from that, we'll come back up, but the stocks adjusted for inflation probably will never get higher than we've seen, especially in this bubble, okay? We're plateauing, so is Europe. In Northern Europe, is more like the US holding up well. Southern Europe is one of the worst in the world, okay? Southern Europe. Now, East Asia has been the fastest to rise. Japan, Korea, and now China. And they are going to be the fastest to fall. There's something about Asians, particularly East Asians, that when they get affluent, all affluent people have less kids when they get more affluent because they want those kids to be better educated, get in good college, and do well. So having kids is counterproductive to smart, affluent people. Well, Asia more so. So they've reacted more. They're dropping births as they've gotten affluent. It's just been dramatic. So East Asia is going to be the biggest fall. East Asia and Southern Europe are going to be the biggest falling areas of the developed or near developed world in the coming decades. And Southeast Asia first, and then India and eventually Pakistan are going to be the biggest risers. Okay. Yeah. So that's the future, and Northern America, U.S. and Canada hold up the best in the developed world, and Northern Europe like UK, France, and Scandinavia, and the rest. I mean, the rest of Europe and East Asia really are going to have huge falls, and nobody is going to expect what happens to China. Nobody expected Japan. I was the only guy in '89 that said Japan's done. Everybody's worshiping Japan and saying the US is done. No, Japan is done demographically. And Japan has done nothing but fall since, and will never see new highs in stocks, and had to overstimulate themselves just to get where they are today. And they're going to fall hard. But China is going to be the story. Biggest rise, fastest rise since the 1980s, over 4 decades, and biggest fall over the next decade plus. India is going to do the same thing. I see India on a similar rise from into here, this downturn, say 2024, into it's at least 2055 before India starts to peak and kind of plateaus for a while, into 2055 to 65. So India is going to be the next big thing like China, and it's going to eventually be richer in richer in GDP per capita and much larger population, peaking eventually at 1.7, while China falls towards 800 million. That's a huge story that nobody's going to see till it happens. And it's already set in stone to me. That's already going to happen unless China pulls a miracle, which is impossible, since they've overbuilt and or if India just totally becomes super socialistic and blows it. India would have to consciously blow it not to be the next big thing.